So before we start today's show, we want to talk about what's been going on here in Southern California with the tragedy with the Southern California wildfires. You know, we've been gone, Ritch, for the last couple of weeks. We haven't aired a show. We've gone black because this has affected everybody down the line, even with us to an extent that we had a couple of scares.
Absolutely.
And we wanted to share some resources with everybody, but just wanted to talk about why we hadn't been on. We did this partially because it had affected us to a certain degree. We had a couple of really big scares.
Sure.
And we had to tear down all of our equipment in the studio here. And so it's just been a very trying time. I think we're entering like the third week now of, these fires that have been just popping up everywhere.
Yeah, we have. And, in the last couple of days, there's been a new fire that emerged out of, the Lake Hughes area up north.
Correct.
Where the winds are, whipping up again.
Exactly.
But yeah, I mean, it's affected everybody. I feel, and I know a lot of us do feel, a tremendous sense of gratitude, that we didn't lose our home like so many of the extended, MUBUTV family. We know people.
Right.
I know you know people
yes.
who you've worked with,
that have lost everything.
They have nothing but the clothes on their back.
Right.
And they've lost their homes, and, we're going to be feeling the effects of that. Of this fire for a very, very long time.
Yeah, so that was kind of partial for the reason why we went black for a couple of weeks, because, we had to set up all the gear again and everything, and, just out of respect for everybody. But we did want to come back to talk to everybody, especially, again, this is more geared towards the musicians that were affected here in Southern California and Los Angeles, greater Los Angeles area. So we wanted to share some of these links, which we will put all the links. We're not going to go through the actual URLs on here, but we're going to talk about the different ones that we have, and then we're going to post an article up, and it'll also be in the show notes for this particular episode. So the first one is Music Cares, which is obviously the Recording Academy's philanthropic arm, is offering financial assistance. Music Cares is a resource to music professionals impacted by the fires in the Los Angeles area, and Music Care provides short-term disaster relief, including $1,500 in financial assistance and a $500 grocery card to the music professionals impacted. Music Cares disaster relief is intended to cover short-term costs. Should you incur costs from evacuating for hotel, food supplies, Music Cares is also able to provide additional support for individuals and considerable impact, including damage to their homes, medical issues, damaged musical equipment, or longer-term relocation needs. Music Care support is available to the music professionals in any capacity with 5 years of employment or credit on 6 commercially released recordings. And if you would like to request support from Music Cares, please reach out to Music Cares Relief at musiccares.org. And again, we're going to provide that link as well. Music Cares is obviously an extension of the
links. Yeah.
Right.
And then there's also, ASCAP has an emergency relief fund, which people have been donating to. They have a $1 million fund, which is designed to assist ASCAP composers and songwriters and its members in the Los Angeles area who, as Eric mentioned, have suffered loss to, one-time stipends in the amount of $1,500. For ASCAP writer members and so forth. So you can apply for that on the link. Just click the link and it will take you right to the application.
Right. And these are for ASCAP writer members that are in good standing as of January 1st, 2025, who does not have a resignation notice pending. The stipends will be awarded on a first-come, first-served basis while funds are available, and we'll provide that link. Another organization, the Sona Foundation Songwriter Fund, which is the Songwriters of North America Foundation, relaunched its Songwriters Fund to provide emergency relief for songwriters and composers that have been impacted by the wildfires. In order to qualify for this one, for the $500 emergency grants, songwriters can visit the organization's website and provide examples that demonstrate professional level work as a musician, prove that they were and based around in the area of the fires, and then provide 3 recent songwriter and or composer credits. And the qualifying writers and composers will then receive payment via direct deposit, check, or digital wallet, and we'll provide that link as well too.
In addition, there's also, We Are Moving the Needle, which is micro grants for the Wildfire Relief Fund. This was just launched last week, and it's designed to support, early and mid-career producers, engineers, and creators who have lost studio space or gear in the wildfires. And those looking to apply, there is a link that they can go directly to So that's another very, very specific one.
Yeah, and for people that are listening that weren't in the Los Angeles area, if you guys want to donate to any of these funds too, I'm sure they're accepting. I know the Red Cross is doing a big one. So, if you guys are not sure about what to donate to, definitely go to the Red Cross website because they do have a link, which we will provide as well too. Another resource that we have here is the Entertainment Community Fund. And this one is emergency financial assistance from the Entertainment Community Fund is open to eligible performing arts and entertainment professionals who are in times of unexpected critical need. And it can also help with basic living expenses, including healthcare and housing. On its website, the fund notes that the applicants impacted by the LA wildfires will be asked to upload a list of documents. If you do not have access to these documents, upload a blank file. Once we receive the application, we will work with you to complete the application. And again, we'll provide that link in the show notes.
Another one is Backline, which is, the mental health nonprofit. They're sharing resources for musicians in Los Angeles via social media and offering its own services. Know that Backline is here for you and that you're not alone. So, we have a link that you can go to. There's an 800 number, 800-985-5990 that you can call for that as well.
Yeah, that's a disaster distress hotline for free 24/7 support by calling that number. Another organization which we've known for a long time, the Sweet Relief Musicians Fund. They are a nonprofit helping musicians and music industry workers in need, and they've launched a natural disaster relief fund for those in the Los Angeles County and the surrounding areas. Applications are also open for those seeking relief, with funds raised going towards loss of music-related equipment, medical bills related to the fires, and other vital living expenses. So again, we'll have the link to provide that to donate or to fill out an application.
Guitar Center Music Foundation is another one that is offering, they've announced on their website that they are offering support to the LA area musicians and music programs affected by the devastating fires. Eligible individuals can apply for a one-time grant to help. Again, the link is on there, will be on the site there as well.
Yeah, and that's to help replace instruments or lost or damaged that were in the fire. NAMM, which is obviously everybody knows, actually it's actually happening this weekend as we speak, as we talk about this. NAMM is going on. The NAMM Foundation has pledged $50,000 and is welcoming further donations via its website. The fund aims to provide needs-based assistance to NAMM members, employees of NAMM member companies, music education programs, and music professionals that have been impacted by the fires. The foundation said it is currently assessing the needs of the affected community and will announce details about the distribution process and application guidelines in the near future. So you can check that out. And actually, like what we said, NAMM is going on currently right now. So, we'll provide that on the link as well too.
In addition, Fender, the guitar maker, is also providing a fund. They have invited musicians who have lost instruments or gear in the wildfires to submit details about the losses, and there's a link that you can go to on the site as well to apply for relief.
Yeah, and Fender put here that they promise to respond and replenish requests to the best of their abilities. So there's submission details there that we'll provide. Another organization, Crew Nation, the Crew Nation Global Relief Fund, is committing $1 million to assist performing musicians, live music crew, and live musician industry workers that have been affected by the recent wildfires in LA. Crew Nation has opened up applications for grants for up to $5,000 for individuals that are currently employed within the industry facing displacement, expenses due to mandatory evacuation orders, damages, or loss. Those seeking support can apply for the Crew Nation Fund, and we'll provide that link as well.
And then there's also the National Independent Venue Foundation. They're a nonprofit arm of the National Independent Venues Association. They're stepping up to provide critical disaster relief to help venues and businesses rebuild and reopen their doors. So any venues or businesses that have been directly impacted, you can also apply there too, and there's a link.
Music Rising, which is a charitable organization founded in 2005 by U2's The Edge, producer Bob Esra, and other music industry partners, will support school music programs that have been affected by the wildfires with its National Music Education Disaster Relief Coalition, which they aim to rebuild music programs, providing instruments and essential resources in the wake of natural disasters. The school music programs impacted by the fires can email musicrising at Hopus, HOPUS.org. That's Music Rising at MHOPUS.org, or call 818-762-4328. That's 818-762-4328 for assistance. And also, we're going to provide that link for everybody. And I'm sure there's a ton of other ones, but those are the ones that we could share. And we hope that everybody can go out and donate and support this really much needed cause. And with that, on with the episode. On today's podcast, we sit down with legendary A&R executive Pete Ganbarg. Pete has been the force behind career-defining projects such as Santana's Supernatural and hit Broadway cast albums such as Hamilton and Dear Evan Hansen. We discuss the impact of fear and work ethic in personal growth, the importance of music history in the industry, and his experience in identifying and nurturing talent. Plus, Pete shares insightful anecdotes from his career, including the stunning success of Smooth, his new venture with Pure Tone Records, and his innovative rock and roll high school podcast. You can't afford to miss it. Insiders, are you ready? Welcome to MUBUTV's Music Business Insider Podcast, where our mission is to educate, empower, and engage artists and music business professionals who are dedicated to having a successful career in the new music industry. Here are your hosts, Ritch, Esra, and Eric Knight.
Welcome back, Insiders, to another episode of the Music Business Insider Podcast, where our mission is to educate, empower, and engage your music career. On today's episode, we're thrilled to welcome back a legend in the music industry, Pete Ganbarg. We dive deep into Pete's fascinating journey, from spotting the next big thing in A&R to creating the iconic Rock and Roll High School podcast, and even revealing the inside story of Carlos Santana's comeback hit, Smooth, from his album Supernatural. Pete shares his invaluable insights on the importance of work ethic, forming connections, and the role fear plays in personal growth. We'll also get into his tips on discovering talent and why understanding music history can shape the future of A&R. Whether you're an aspiring music professional or just a fan of the business, you won't want to miss this episode. But first, a word from our sponsor. Hey, Insiders! Are you an aspiring musician, artist, band, or future music business professional looking to take your career to the next level? Well, look no further. At MUBUTV, we offer personalized career counseling and coaching designed specifically for folks like you.
Imagine having both of us by your side, guiding you through every step of your music journey. Our sessions are tailored to meet your unique needs, focusing on critical aspects of your music career, such as refining your songs, defining your artist story, identifying your target audience, and enhancing your social media presence, just to name a few.
Whether you're just starting out or looking to elevate your existing career, we've got you covered. Our comprehensive approach ensures you get insights on everything from live shows to branding and marketing strategies. We understand that every artist is unique. That's why our coaching is personalized just for you.
And here's the best part. We offer flexible coaching packages that fit any budget. Choose from individual sessions ranging from 30 to 90 minutes, or save with our discounted 4-session packages. Experience custom sessions designed to enhance your music career, with opportunities for greater savings when you choose bundled sessions. Investing in your musical journey has never been more accessible.
Imagine the clarity and direction you'll gain after just one session. The feedback on your songs, the strategies to grow your audience, and the confidence to perform live, all tailored just for you.
So why wait? Don't let uncertainty hold you back. Join us for your free 15-minute discovery call at book.mubutv.com for a transformative coaching experience that will elevate your music career. That's book.mubutv.com.
Welcome back, Insiders. Today's featured guest is none other than the legendary A&R executive, Pete Ganbarg, who we welcome back for the second time. Pete was on our series a long time ago on the video series. Yeah. And if you have not had a chance to check that out, definitely, take a look. It's on our video series.
It's our top episode, and it's one of the greatest conversations on the subject of A&R I've ever seen.
Oh, well, thank you. I remember the conversation very, very well. This was a conversation that I'm so glad that we had, because we got to really go into a whole deep dive, not only on the subjects of A&R, but on the subject of Pete's career, which expands beyond just rock and pop and artists, but also went to Broadway.
Right.
And iconic cultural shifting shows like Hamilton and Dear Evan Hansen. I mean, these were some of the most successful Broadway soundtracks in decades. Yep. It's really, really interesting. Some of the things that I thought that really struck me on an emotional level was how he talked about, work ethic and consistency. He underscores that critical role of not only hard work and consistency and showing up, but he also stressed that, missing certain opportunities can lead to lost career defining moments. He spoke about how, I guess for whatever reason was doing certain things and he didn't end up following Clive when Clive formed Jay.
Yeah.
But, there's also the other philosophy that says, there are no mistakes in the world, and maybe he was meant, he wouldn't have had the career at Atlantic had he not done that.
Right.
And he's had an iconic career at Atlantic Records,
Absolutely.
as the episode, clearly will indicate.
Yeah, I also thought, his career advice from Pete, that it's all about hard work and consistency. Sometimes missing an opportunity can mean losing a career-defining a moment. And I think we talked about Jimmy Iovine exemplifies this perfectly, and you can maybe talk about that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Jimmy Iovine, the moment was, it was Easter Sunday. He gets a call from the studio from Roy Cicala saying, "We need you to come in." Jimmy says, "Okay." He tells his mother, "I'm coming." And they're like, "No, you can't go in. You've got the family coming. It's Easter Sunday, blah, 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 blah." He says, "Ma, I'm going." And Jimmy goes. He gets to the studio, and who's sitting there? John Lennon. And it was like, whoa,
Yeah.
And this was like, because growing up, the Beatles were everything.
Yeah.
to Jimmy Iovine. And he tells the story, Jimmy Iovine tells the story where he says, Roy basically said, I wanted just to see how committed you were. I wanted to see.
It was a test.
It was a test. Exactly. Yeah. It was a test. And, he got to work with John Lennon, with one of his heroes.
And the rest is history of his career.
Yes.
Also, I thought one of the other areas of mentoring talent and being actively involved in mentoring talent, like introducing Jeff Levin to Lynn and the Roots, highlights his commitment to nurturing the next generation. And I thought this is a very interesting thing that you guys are going to listen to, because it's all about passing that torch. And that's one of the things that some of the guests that you and I are trying to interview, we've got these 3 different sets of people that have already been through the mountaintop and they're at the twilight of their careers, people that are in that mid journey of their career, and then people that are just coming in. And so it's very interesting. And I love the fact that that Pete is trying to pass that torch and that knowledge on to the next generation of aspiring A&R people.
It's so interesting you bring that up, because it's, the longer I'm in this business, the more I hear from people around that very subject of, that people aren't mentoring the next generation enough. And that's why hearing that, Pete made that such an important factor. And it's illustrated by his own executives at Atlantic who started out as like literally kids. 15-year-old kids in high school.
Which he's going to talk about in the interview.
Exactly, which was, really interesting. The other thing that really captured me in this conversation was how Pete talked about learning from his failures. He compares working to A&R to baseball, where not all projects succeed, but learning from each experience is key to eventual success. And, he spoke of, certain projects that were not successful.
Right.
Not only the Santanas, which were enormously successful and Grammy winners,
but the ones that he thought that were going to be hit winners out of the park, and they just ended up not working, because, he says at the end of the day, it's all about the audience that makes that decision.
Exactly. And that's something that, I remember when I too worked for Clive, like Pete did at Arista. Clive used to talk about that as well. And, although Clive couched it in a different term, he used to say, nobody remembers your failures.
Right.
Which is true. Yeah. They remember your successes, your Whitney Houstons and your Annie Lennoxes.
Of course.
But they don't remember the acts that you truly believed in, but that didn't. But it's a thing of taking that experience and moving on, not getting so crushed or, behind it. But I thought that the idea that he talked about, learning from your failures, and I remember there have been many executives who have spoken about the aspect of that, which I think is a very important one, which is that often your failures can teach you a lot more than your successes.
And with that, insiders, sit back, relax, and enjoy our featured conversation with Pete Ganbarg.
Pete, welcome. It's great to have you back.
Thanks, guys. Good to be back.
Good to talk to you. Listen, I want to start this conversation, given your extensive experience in A&R across various industry transformations, how do you view the current evolution of the A&R role, particularly regarding the influence of social media platforms, and discovery and things like that with regards to your job in A&R?
I find that there's a lot less of traditional A&R from when I was coming up, where the A&R person would legitimately be in the trenches figuring out the best material for the artist, how to find it, how to improve it, kick at it, make a C a B, make a B an A, make an A an A plus, and really utilizing the resources that we all were trained on back then, which is the lyric sheets and the arrangements and the productions, and really deep diving into making these records great. I think it's still done to a degree, but it's definitely not done as much as it used to be. And, social media has definitely given the new crop of A&Rs a shortcut where, something goes viral on some platform, you pick it up, you put it out, and you hope for the best. That's not really how we used to do it. We used to sweat a lot more.
Yeah, and it's also a thing of, I think you're speaking about something deeper too, which is the values, the values around A&R, which is something that I think technology and, social media and so forth have changed.
It's become more data driven.
Yeah, they've changed.
Yeah, it's true. It's definitely true. I'm going further, even now I'm going further the other way, where I'm studying a lot about A&R history going back to the early 20th century. And it's fascinating because when you think about A&R, there was a point in time where it didn't exist. First you had the history of recorded music where recorded sound was invented, right? And then it evolves to a point where there is music being recorded and released commercially so that people can listen to it. Then it's kind of a free-for-all. How are we going to figure out which artist to record? How are we going to figure out what material that these artists can record? So the earliest A&R people had to invent their job on the fly, and it's fascinating reading about these people. And then, it's only around 100 years ago that this was happening. And in 100 years, we've gone from that, creating something from absolutely nothing to, oh, yeah, this is viral on TikTok. Let's write a big check and hopefully it works.
Yeah, precisely. And I think, you know a lot of the history of this, and that, originally A&R people were people who would find the song, but they were also people traditionally from the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s who also made the records, which is
Correct.
Interesting too. And we also lived in a time where, with very, very rare exception, the Duke Ellingtons or, those kinds of artists were the only ones who were self-contained. Every other
Right.
artist in that era, needed the songs to record. So that was a very big factor of the A&R process, and that all shifted in the 60s.
Yeah, the definition of a record producer as we know it now didn't really come into play until the 60s. You're absolutely right. Before that, it was the A&R person's responsibility. This was back in the day where the engineers wore white lab coats and it was very scientific. It wasn't until the 60s where, an outside independent record producer would be hired by a record label to go and make a record. That's a fairly new construct that's maybe 60 years old at this point.
Yeah, it's interesting. Throughout several of the documentaries I've seen in my life, George Martin used to talk about that process, and I've heard some of the various other artists. Bob Dylan also talked about it when he would go into CBS in the early 60s to make records. He actually said exactly what you said. He said, these people were in like lab coats, and you couldn't touch certain pieces of equipment and all of that. And that is
Right.
the way that it was made back then, and it's an interesting process.
Yeah, and it's obviously changed a lot since then. But with people like Bob Dylan, who you mentioned, Bob Dylan didn't produce his own records. He had record producers, but they weren't wearing the white lab coats. I think that things definitely took off in the 60s. And, you had the independent record producers, starting in the mid 60s through the 70s, through the 80s. Now, it's basically a whole new ballgame where you have record producers, but you also have self-contained artists who are not only making the music themselves at home without the need of a recording studio, but they're able for the first time in our lifetime to, be in charge of their own distribution as well by uploading a song that they could create same day. And, back when we were growing up, you had to jump a lot of hurdles to get your music to a place where people could buy it. It had to be physical, and it had to be, at some sort of retail establishment, usually a record store. Now, it's basically all you need is a phone and an upload button. And, I can record something now, and 10 minutes from now, the entire world has the option, the opportunity to hear it. Much different ballgame. Not necessarily better, by the way.
No, I totally agree. Last year we had a conversation with Ron Fair, and he talked about this very concept that you were just speaking about. And he said, one of the main differences between A&R of the past and A&R today, and this is kind of like on a meta level, is that you were picked. You got a record deal as an artist because someone deemed that you were worthy of that deal. Someone made that decision and made a record, a Berry Gordy or a Clive Davis or Yamada, whoever, somebody made the decision. And, and he pointed out that, a lot of times those decisions didn't pan out, but when they did, that was the basis of support for the whole industry. And he said, now, like exactly what you were saying is that now the public makes that decision.
Right.
Yeah, the public makes that decision. So it's.
Yeah, I mean, the public always made the decision in terms of deciding what a hit was.
Right.
The Clive Davises and the Ahmet Ertegans couldn't, tell the world this is a hit.
Right.
They could throw a lot of money into something, but ultimately it's always been the audience. But now the audience can bypass the record label if they gravitate towards something on a platform like TikTok that hasn't even been vetted by a record company yet.
Right. Exactly.
Pete, it's Eric, and so excited to have you back on the show again. I did want to say to all of our listeners out there that are listening, Pete happens to have the distinction of being our #1 most watched video on MUBUTV's history. And if anybody hasn't seen that interview between Ritch and Pete, should go watch that on YouTube. It's a great conversation. So thank you again for having us for being on the show.
Thanks for having me back. That was a long time ago.
Yeah, it was great conversation. It's one of the best A&R interviews. Really great conversation. But I wanted to ask you, your work in A&R has been incredibly diverse stylistically. Was your belief and musical confidence something you always had, or did it evolve as you gained more experience in the business?
Not really. I mean, I guess it's a blessing and a curse that my taste has always been of a teenage pop music fan. And I got ridiculed for it when I was in college, like, who listens to pop music? But I listen to everything. And ultimately, I learned a long time ago that my opinion as an A&R person doesn't matter. The only opinion that matters, as we mentioned earlier, is the audience's opinion. So my job is to figure out what the audience may want to hear before they even know what they want to hear. And so, I've always considered myself genre agnostic. Music is music, and any project that I'm working on is usually some sort of puzzle that we have to, as A&R people, we have to figure out how to solve the puzzle. And once we solve the puzzle, then hopefully it is what the audience is going to gravitate towards. Like Ritch said earlier, I have been involved with some real stinkers, like artists that I've signed or records that I've made that I thought the audience was going to like. Ultimately, their vote means more than my opinion. And if they vote they don't like it, then I just got to go back to the drawing board and try to learn the lesson of why they didn't like it and what can I do better this time to make sure they like it. And what people don't realize is I always use the analogy of baseball, where if you're a baseball hitter and you're, every 10 times that you're up at bat, if you make a base hit 3 or 4 times out of those 10 at bats, you're batting 300 or 400. If you bat 400, you're the greatest hitter of all time and you're in the Hall of Fame. That still means that 6 out of 10 times you miss. So as an A&R person, if I'm batting 300, if I'm batting 400, that means that 6 out of 10 or 7 out of 10, projects that I'm putting out to the marketplace are failing. And I'm still, eligible for the Hall of Fame with a 300 or 400 batting average. It's fascinating. But the audience is going to tell you what they like, and they're going to tell you what they don't like.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's funny, as you were speaking about that, I was thinking I think the all-time record for number ones is Max Martin. He's got 25. But out of how many thousands of songs, and that's not to take away from the point you're making, but it's like, and he's considered, among like Holland Dozier, like the number one of all time with pop hits. And yet your point is so valid and correct. It's kind of like, I guess you could analogize it with anybody who makes a vast amount of things, the choices of successes that you have versus, how much. Clive used to say a very interesting thing when this conversation would come up about what we're talking about. He used to say, and I think he actually even put it in his book, nobody remembers your failures.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Except yourself.
Well, exactly.
Right,
Exactly.
I was recently cleaning out like some old boxes of the last 16 years that I've spent at Atlantic as head of A&R for 16 years, and I was cleaning out a bunch of boxes, and I had completely forgotten about some of these artists that I had signed that just went nowhere.
Wow!
And I'm like, man, it's like, and these were some good records that probably are never going to hit the mass audience the way that we imagined that they would when the band started making music and I decided to sign them. But it just goes to show you that the audience, votes with their, they vote with their ears. They decide what it is they're going to want to hear over and over.
Absolutely. On that note, Pete, I want to get into the actual A&R process. And one of your biggest, most successful A&R stories is the story of Carlos Santana's comeback album Supernatural and the worldwide smash Smooth. It's the stuff of A&R legend. And for a couple reasons. Number one, it was also your idea to make the album a concept of artists collaborating with Carlos. So my question is a couple things. What was your inspiration for that concept? And number two, can you also talk to us about the finding and developing, yes, I said developing, of the smash hit song Smooth? Because there is a great A&R story behind the development of that song. So on both of those.
Yeah, I mean, yes. Yeah, and this speaks towards what we were talking about at the beginning of this conversation, which is kind of the long lost art of A&R. A&R stands for two things, artists and repertoire. And the repertoire is as important as the artist. Without one, you don't have the other. When you're able to pair the brilliant song with the peerless voice, you have Whitney Houston, I Will Always Love You. You have Aretha Franklin, Respect. You have Frank Sinatra, Strangers in the Night. That is kismet. That doesn't happen. That's like lightning, striking, right? So for me, when I got to Arista in 1997, I was around 30 years old. Clive hired me, but I don't think he, was expecting anything. I think that he, his gut told him to give me a shot, but it's not like I had signed, the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and Nirvana, before that. I had a couple of hits, but I think he was taking a chance on me. And I came in like day one to Arista Records in 1997, really without a manual of how to do A&R for Clive Davis. Ritch, you did it.
Yeah.
It's like, a lot of really, really great A&R people have worked for Clive Davis and not succeeded at his company just because he's very, very specific and very particular about how A&R is done.
Right.
And there's no manual saying this is how you do it here. You get thrown in the deep end of the pool and you either swim or you drown. And so I was there around 6 weeks trying to figure out my way in because I didn't have anything I wanted to sign. And Clive's not the A&R person, or he wasn't back then, the label head, who was going to assign you a project. Things are done collectively there. And he had just signed Santana. He signed Santana before I got there in the summer of 97. And of course, he had signed Santana for a second time, having signed him in 1969 to Columbia. And Clive's vision is always like, what if? What if I could bring Rod Stewart back or Aretha Franklin back or Santana back? And I think that was more the headline in his imagination than it was, hey, this is how we're going to do it. So when I came in, I had plenty of time because I didn't have any projects there. And I had been there for around a month and a half. And like I said earlier, I was a student of pop music from a very, very early age. And so I was always paying attention to what the audience was reacting to and the audience was responding to. And there was a record, an album that was selling back in that era, in 1997, selling better than it should have. And it was a duets album by B.B. King, and it was called Deuces Wild. And I remember seeing it on the charts and saying, oh, B.B. King doesn't usually chart, record albums now, in the late 90s. Why are people buying this record? So I listened to the record, and it was a duets record. It was B.B. King with Tracy Chapman, B.B. King with Bonnie Raitt, B.B. King with D'Angelo. And I'm like, really interesting concept. And then I listened to the record, and I'm like, there's a ceiling here. Any A&R person would be able to listen to it and say, yeah, this isn't going to get on pop radio because, and if it did, back then, if it didn't get on pop radio, you had a ceiling. You weren't going to sell millions and millions of records. And the reason that it wasn't going to get on pop radio is because the songs weren't pop hits. They were covers of B.B. King songs, and there were other songs that were just not going to go all the way as pop hits. And also, as a duet album, you had B.B. King singing, and his voice was an older voice at that point. Older voices don't make it on contemporary radio. So my idea was to completely steal the concept from B.B. King, but tweak it so that what I would do is I would go to the library, because this was before the internet, and I would go and I would study every single contemporary hit artist who had given an interview and mentioned Carlos Santana as a reason, an influence that they got into music in the first place. And if I'm able to find that person, then I'm able to make that phone call and say to them, hey, how would you like to collaborate with Carlos Santana? And then before I agree to it, I would say, get them all excited about collaborating with their hero, and then say, not so fast, price of admission, one hit song. What I knew is that Carlos doesn't sing, or he doesn't sing like B.B. King sang. His voice is the guitar. So the guitar voice, unlike the human voice, doesn't age. And so if we can get the contemporary pop stars of the day to write a hit song for Carlos Santana, who can then duet with them on his guitar, I've got a shot to maybe get a great song on the radio. So I really liked this idea that I had, even though it was stolen from somebody else and then tweaked, as all great ideas usually are. But I still had to run the idea by Clive. And back then, Clive didn't do email. I still don't think he does email. But the email that I wrote, I printed out, I put it on his assistant's desk, and I basically spelled out the blueprint of how I would envision this album. And I waited for him to get back to me, and he never got back to me. He never told me it was a great idea. He never told me it was a lousy idea. He just didn't respond. And so I was the new guy. I was flustered. I didn't know what to do because I couldn't say, why didn't you respond to my email? But I believed in the idea. So, having some chutzpah, I picked up the telephone. I called Carlos Santana's then manager. I introduced myself. He didn't know who I was. And I said, I have an idea for Carlos. He's like, great. We haven't heard from anyone at the label with any creative ideas since we signed. What's your idea? And I ran it by him. And he's like, great. When can we start? So I said, you know what? I haven't gotten Clive's blessing, but I'm going to start anyway. And if Clive wants me to start, he's the head of the label. He's my boss. If he wants me to stop, rather, he'll tell me to stop. So I started. He never told me to stop. And we ended up selling 30 million records.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So now The other part to that is, one of those songs was the lead-off single
with Rob Thomas,
which has with Rob Thomas, which has its own story and it has its own development, which is unusual for a hit song. And I was wondering if you could tell that, because I think that that's a very, very informative. I mean, you want to get to the heart of what A&R actually does. That's a great story, and I was wondering if you could share it with us.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's interesting that we talk about something like this because I've got friends who are great A&R people and great creative publishing A&Rs as well. And some of them, if they hear a song and the song doesn't sound like a hit to them, they throw it in the garbage and move on to the next song. I've never been like that. I've always been like, if there is a piece of something in this song that could be turned into a hit, it's incumbent on me as the A&R person to try to see that through. And that's exactly what happened with Smooth, where I was finishing this album that I had been working on for a year and a half. We spent a lot of money because at that point we had a lot of pretty big guest stars on the album who all cost a lot of money. And remember, Santana hadn't had a gold record in close to 20 years at that point. And so people started, coming to me and saying, what are you doing? You're like spending all this money on an artist who is arguably past his prime. You're going to lose a lot of money for the record label. Even Clive said to me at one point, he's like, I think money grows on trees around here. But I figured, I figured that if we're going for it, we're going to go for it. We're going to go all in and we're going to go big or we're going to go home, and there are certain projects that you do that with, and this was one of them. And we could have easily, lost everything, but sometimes when you go all in, the risk is worth it. And so I had to finish the record. Somebody stopped by my office, one of the guys in charge, and said, hey, we have to get this record out before the end of the fiscal year. This was in January. The fiscal year ended in June, at the end of June. And said, we have to get this album out before the end of June because we think we'll be able to ship 100,000 units. And we need those numbers for our year-end budget. And I said to him, I'm not finished yet. He's like, Pete, you're finished. Finish up, you're done. We got to get this record out. And I had this nagging doubt, even though we had some really good songs, that we were missing a first single. So as luck would have it, and I'm kind of getting nervous that I'm going to miss the deadline here because now I'm up against it. I get a call from an A&R friend of mine. His name is Jerry Griffith. Great A&R guy.
Oh, yeah. I worked with Jerry at Arista. Yeah. He was the one who turned Clive on to Whitney.
He was. And Jerry and I became friendly. And when I got to Arista, I would call him anytime that I was unsure of how to navigate these Clive waters because he had done it so well for a long time. And so we became friends. And one day, as I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to finish this record, Jerry calls me. And I hadn't spoken to him for a while. And he says, hey, are you still working on Santana? I said, yeah, it's good timing because I got to finish. I need one more song. He's like, oh, I met this guy. I may start managing him. He's a songwriter. He lives in New York. His name is Ital Schur. He had a hit, within the last few years by Maxwell called Ascension. He's a real muso. I told him about Santana. He said he's got a ton of ideas. Can he come up and see you? And at that point, I was open to anything because I didn't know if we were going to find this song and if we were going to find it, who was going to come through the door with it. And I learned a long time ago, you can never say no. You got to listen to everything. So Ital comes in and he plays me a song that he had written for Santana called Room 17. And I listened to the song. And Ital and I had never met before. And the song ends, and I say to him, look, you want the good news or the bad news? I said, the good news is that this track is really good. The track is like classic Santana, but modernized. The lyric is ridiculous. I mean, he's never going to sing this song. Room 17 is the hotel room where, the guy and the girl are going to meet and get it on, right? And like, that's the opposite of, Mr. Peace and Love, Carlos Santana. It's just not going to happen. And he starts saying to me, I think you're wrong. This is a hit song. I'm like, I think you're wrong. I think it's half a hit song. Give me the track. Throw away your lyric. Throw away your melody. I don't think either of them is viable. And we start arguing with each other. This is the first time we're meeting. Finally, I wrestle the track out of him. And this is before MP3s. This is before, you could easily kind of press a button and just, send the track I email to somebody. So he goes back to his studio. He removes the lyric after, he and I go at it a little bit. And he removes the lyric and the melody and just gives me the track. And like I said, unlike now, you can't email this around because the technology didn't exist back then. So I'm listening to this track, and the more I listen to it, the more excited I get. But now we've got to get somebody to write to it. So I call up a buddy of mine who's a music publisher at the time at EMI Music Publishing, and that was Evan Lamberg, who now is at Universal Music Publishing and is still a dear, dear friend of mine to this day. I called him up and I said, Evan, I have this track that I need somebody to write to. And I literally held up the receiver of the phone to play him the track. And I said, do you have any ideas for this? And I play him the track. He's like, that's really good. Who is that for? Santana? I'm like, yeah, I think it could be, if I get the lyric right, this could be the final song for the album. It could also potentially be the first single. He's like, Pete, I know who should write it. I said, who? He said, Rob Thomas. And I'm like, who? Rob Thomas? From Matchbox 20? Remember, this is 1999. Rob Thomas wasn't Rob Thomas back then. Matchbox 20 was a pretty good band, but they were they were in a part of groups like Collective Soul and bands like that nobody knew who the lead singer was. They knew the songs on the radio, right? So he said to me, he's like, Pete, do you trust me? I said, Evan, your ears are as good as anybody I know. Of course I trust you. He's like, Pete, don't tell this to any other songwriter that I work with, but Rob Thomas is the best songwriter I've ever signed. And I'm like, you're kidding. He's like, trust me. He's like, can I send the track to Rob? I'm like, absolutely. So he sends the track to Rob. And sometimes, when the stars align, you have no idea, what's going on kind of in the ether, in the universe. Turns out that Rob had just come off the road touring with Matchbox 20 for a long time. And he was finally off the road with his fiance, living in the West Village in New York. His fiance, as Kismet would have it, was Spanish. He hears this track and he decides to write a love letter to his fiance, Marisol. And Evan calls me a week later and says, Rob wrote to that track. He's going to come up to my office. If you want to meet us, he'll play it for us. So I go up to Evan's office at EMI Music Publishing. Rob comes, first time I'm meeting Rob. And they play the track, the same track that I had sent to Evan for Rob to write to. And Rob starts singing to it, reading lyrics off a lined yellow legal pad. And he starts singing this song. And the song ends, and he looks at Evan, his publisher, and Evan looks at Rob and says, Rob, that's amazing. You nailed it. That's a smash. And Rob says, thanks, Evan. And they both look at me, and I'm shaking my head. And Evan's like flashing me daggers, like, why are you shaking your head? This guy just sold millions of Matchbox 20 records. You're making me look bad here. You're embarrassing. And I said, Rob, I don't think that you're all the way there yet. And to Rob's credit, he's like, why not? What do you hear? And I said, go to your chorus. And so he goes to the chorus, which at the time was the part of the song that said, and if you say this life is good enough. And I'm like, I don't think that's a chorus. I think that's a pre-chorus. I think you can beat that melodically and lyrically. And he said, okay, let me try it. So he goes back a week later. We do it again. He's like, what do you think of this? And he sings a new melody to a new part that he's written. The part of, and if you say this life is good enough, that becomes then he sings a new melody that ultimately became the chorus of Smooth. But in the category of Nothing Is Ever Easy, the original lyric is, give me something hot to make me move, get my motor running so I can get to you. You've got the kind of loving that can be so smooth. Give me your heart, make it real, or forget about it. And I say to Rob, I'm like, oh my God, you're onto something. But the first two lines of this song, get my motor running? What is this, Born to be Wild?
Yeah, exactly.
It's like,
exactly.
And Evan turns to me, he's like, Pete, I know Rob's writing really well. I don't think he wrote that line. And I say to Rob, I'm like, Rob, did you write that line? He's like, no, I felt bad for Ital. He wrote the line because it was his idea. I'm like, how about we not feel bad for Ital? Do you have a line there in your mind that you would have done if Ital wasn't given those two lines to write? He's like, yeah. I said, what are they, Rob? He's like, well, my lines are just like the ocean under the moon. That's the same as the emotion that I get from you. I said, Rob, do you want to call Tom and tell him, or should I?
Wow.
Yeah.
So that's how we got the song. But again, nothing is ever easy. At this point, Clive Davis has no idea that this is going on. You know, I have these guys re-demo the song 6 times, 7 times, 8 times until my ears tell me that now is the time that it's right and this demo can be played for Clive. So I go into Clive's office. It was an A&R meeting at the time, and there are like 5 or 6 other people in the room, and I play him the song. And I'm like literally holding my breath because I've spent nothing but, you know, time on this song, kind of Frankensteining monster, this idea that once was Room 17 and then was Born to Be Wild and now it's Smooth. And if Clive doesn't like it, it's going to die right here, right now, right? And so I hold my breath for what seems like 3.5 minutes. The song ends. Clive looks at me. He's like, I love it. I'm like, really? It's that easy? He's like, I love it. That sounds like a smash.
And that's not something you hear all the time from
right,
Clive. It's,
right. Well, never from Clive.
Never, exactly.
So finally, I exhale. He's like, what does Carlos think of it? I'm like, Clive, I haven't played it for Carlos yet. Because, you know, if you didn't like it, what was I going to do? Have him fall in love with it? And he's like, oh, I love it. Send it to Carlos. So I exhale. I'm really excited because now it's the easy part. Send it to Carlos. But of course, nothing is ever easy. I send it to Carlos. His manager calls me the next day and says, Carlos hates the song you sent him. He will never, ever record this song.
Wow. Oh, God.
So, you know, it's like a fucking marathon of just one idea to finish this album, you know, and luckily, you know, I finally, after a week of pleading with Carlos Santana, got the manager to say to me, Pete, he's not going to record the song. He hates it. But with all due respect, he's known you now for 2 years. He's known Clive Davis for 30 years. If Clive Davis tells him himself that the song is a hit, he'll try it. So I have to go to Clive's office again and say, Clive, Carlos heard the song. He's not convinced that it's right for him or a hit song. He needs to hear it from you. And so Clive, as Clive will do, says to me, Pete, sit down, take out a notebook, and I'm going to dictate a fax, and you're going to type it up and send it to Carlos. And it basically said, Carlos, I understand that you're having questions about this song, but trust me on this. We're going to get the right producer. We're going to, you know, get the right band. This song has the potential to be a big, big hit for you. And Carlos gets the fax, calls me back and says, thank you for doing what I asked you. I will agree to record the song. And then once he recorded the song, he started to like it. Then it became our first single, and the rest is history.
Wow. So did you follow the song as he was doing it, or did he just send you a finished mix, or in the recording process?
I wasn't in the studio with them. Matt Serletic, who had produced all the Matchbox 20 records at that point, went out with Rob Thomas and Carlos's band, and they recorded it.
Okay.
And, you know, so that was his job. And there's one more funny story, which is when Matt sent me his recording. Remember, I'm like all in on this. I'm Robert De Niro on this. I've spent nothing but, you know, smooth 24/7 for the last month. So of course I have the worst case of demo-itis that you've ever gotten in your lifetime. So when I heard Matt's recording of the song, I was convinced that he had ruined the song because he put on this telephone effect on Rob's vocal on the verse. And when I heard it, I was like, what is he doing? In hindsight, that effect on the final version of the song works because it makes the verse feel smaller and makes the chorus feel bigger when you take the effect off. I didn't see that at the time. But this is the genius of Clive Davis. I run into Clive's office and I'm like, Clive, I've got Smooth back from Matt Serletic. He ruined the song. Listen to it. And I play it for him. And the genius of Clive is he looked at me and he knows demo-itis when he sees it. He's like, Pete, you did your job finding the song. Now let Matt Serletic do his. Get out of my office. And he was absolutely right. And Matt was absolutely right. And all of us, you know, to this day, like guys who were in a foxhole in Vietnam, we still joke about that. whenever I see Matt Terletic, he's like, Pete, how's that telephone effect doing?
It's so funny because Clive does have a history with that. You know the story of I Will Always Love You.
Of course.
Yeah, that's the famous story. I mean, him and David Foster almost came to blows over that one because Clive, it was the same principle. He had recorded a guide vocal with Whitney, and Clive, it was the opposite. Clive absolutely loved it and said, no, this is the one with the silent intro,
right,
where it was just her voice.
Right.
And David was just about, he hit the ceiling, and David tells the same story. And, and Clive eventually, I think, he ended up putting it out that way against, not only David didn't like that, but David didn't even know that was happening. So, and you're right. I mean, Clive's instinct on that was absolutely correct. And it not only became a hit record, but it became a standard. It became a classic.
Yeah, 100%.
As did Smooth.
Pete, staying with that thread with Clive, you once mentioned that your biggest career regret was not joining Clive Davis when he formed Jay Records. What led you to feel that way at that time?
I was very immature at that point as an executive because I had just been part of this album that was one of the best-selling albums of all time. And right as we're celebrating the 9 Grammys and the fact that this album had sold over 30 million copies worldwide, Clive gets fired. And BMG, which was, owning Arista at the time, they fired him. They put L.A. Reid in to replace him. And L.A. Reid started talking to me about, man, I give my A&R people credit for the records they do, knowing that Clive's reputation is as a credit hog and things like that. So I also had, for the first time in my career, I had advisors. What the hell does an A&R guy need advisors for? But I had a lawyer and I had a manager and I had these people helping me as an A&R person. But what I didn't realize at the time is they were only looking out for the dollar sign because they figured the more money they can get for me if they're on commission, the more money they're going to get for themselves. And so I mistakenly, followed their lead to go for the check rather than realizing sometimes you go for less money in the short term for more long-term success. And the minute I started working with L.A. Reid when he came and took over Arista, I knew that there's a big difference between how L.A. Reid runs a record company and how Clive Davis runs a record company. And my taste is the Clive Davis taste, is that way of running a record company. But since I stayed with L.A., I couldn't go back to Clive until many years later, once the bridge that I burned had, there was enough time to rebuild it and repair the relationship. And I started working for Clive again in 2003 after I had left, or 2004 after I had left the first time in 1999, 2000.
And, subsequent to that, after that, you had, other A&R jobs. You worked with Epic. You worked with several other companies. And then, I believe in 2008, Craig Kallman at Atlantic asked you to A&R Hailstorm's debut album. And after that, I believe he asked you to run the Atlantic's A&R department. And my question is, what appealed to you about Craig's particular offer after you had worked at a few other big labels and your experience was not so pleasant in the previous 4 or 5 years?
The 5 years that I spent between Epic and Atlantic, I started my own company called Pure Tone Music.
Right.
And I thought that the company was going to be a production company and a publishing company. It turned out, thanks to Clive, that it became an A&R consulting company, which didn't really exist at the time. But Clive called me up and said, hey, how'd you like to come back and A&R some records for me? He never had offered me a full-time job, and I never asked for one. I just started A&Ring records for him. And the A&R community is very small. So once I started doing that for Clive, all my old buddies were calling and saying, hey, if you're doing it for Clive, why don't you do it for us? So most of the label groups became my clients. And before I knew it, I was A&Ring more records as an independent A&R consultant than I was as a full-time employee at any of the record labels that I worked for. So I did that for 2004, 5, 6, 7, and 8 until Clive got fired again. And when Clive got fired again, when I guess RCA, I don't even remember. It's like, soap operas from 15, 20 years ago now. But he got bumped upstairs, and I'm like, you know what? This was a great 5-year run independently. If the phone rings and someone has an offer for me where it's, compelling, and I can, kind of further, the A&R career that I've had in some sort of new capacity, maybe it's the right time. And Craig at Atlantic, who I had worked with on this Hailstorm record, and he liked what I did. I liked working with him. He calls me in the summer of 2008 and says, I think I'm going to shake stuff up. How'd you like to come in and be my new head of A&R? And that was in 2008. And I said, Craig, I think your timing, is right now. It wasn't right before, but I think it's right now. And one thing that I said to him, I said, if I'm coming in, I want to do this my way. I want to build my own staff. I want to train future A&R people. I want to find kids. I want to teach them how to properly A&R records so that one day when I'm not doing this job, you're going to be in good hands because the future will have been trained properly. And where we're talking right now, 2 weeks ago, 170 people get laid off from Atlantic. It's going to be a completely new record label. And your new heads of A&R are the two kids that I hired when they were 16 and 18, who I trained for 10 years. So, I'm excited to see what they do. And I think that hopefully A&R-wise, the label's in good hands.
Hey, Insiders, we hope that you've been enjoying our featured interview. Stay tuned because we've got so much more value coming your way. But before we dive back in, a word from our sponsor.
Hey, Eric, as an artist, what do you find are the most challenging aspects to a music career, especially when you're starting out?
Well, I think one of the first things is just trying to get the direction of who you are as an artist, where you want to go, where you want to be. And, we've talked about it on the show a lot. Who is your target audience? Who you are? What do you stand for? What do you believe in? What do you think would resonate with an audience? And so those are some of the things that I would feel being a new artist. Obviously, what I know now is different because I know these things. But for people that are out there like our audience that don't have necessarily any direction to go would be the first things that I would start off with.
And having the songs that
Absolutely.
Incorporate those elements that you're speaking of into it. That's so important today.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons why we started MUBUTV and why we started this new consulting service that we're offering to all of our insiders out there, because that is another one of the big things. I mean, that is the big thing, is like having the great songs. That's what it really starts off. Our friend Don Grierson always said, it always starts with a great song. So that's probably, besides putting together what your audience and what your target audience is the single most important thing. Where are your songs at currently today? Are you collaborating with people? Are you trying to go out to networking events where you can connect with other songwriters and stuff like that? So
yeah, and what are your strengths?
Exactly.
Are you a strong lyric writer? Are you a strong melody writer? Are you a strong musician, a player?
Right.
And it's really important to get really strong clarity on those issues before proceeding.
I totally agree, Ritch. And, with our consulting services, we offer a myriad of different packages and we've made it super affordable for everybody. So, if you guys are interested out there in connecting with us on a coaching call, you can visit book.mubutv.com and start off with a free 15-minute discovery call.
Well, yeah, absolutely. That we start with an initial 15-minute call where we can get a sense of who you are, what are the issues that you specifically have, right, and want to work on.
Exactly.
And we can go from there. Absolutely.
Yeah, and we tailor everything to your needs. It's not like a cookie cutter thing. We kind of really want to get to know who you are as an artist, where you at today, what's the snapshot of you as an artist today, and then start trying to craft something that's tailor-made for you. So again, if you're interested, visit us at book.mubutv.com for your 15-minute discovery call. And this is a perfect segue, Pete. I mean, you couldn't have written this better. You've not only discovered incredible artists such as 21 Pilots and Christina Perri, Rival Sons, among many others, but a lesser known aspect of your career, which is what you're just touching on, is your commitment to discovering and developing A&R executives, with Jeff Levin and Brandon Davis, both Atlantic A&R executives, being standout examples. Could you share your philosophy on nurturing executive talent, particularly your journey with Jeff, whom you've known since he was 16 and you kind of just alluded to?
Yeah. I mean, it's really important because you have to pay it forward because, no A&R person is going to be able to do A&R forever, And so I met Jeff when he was in high school. He was a junior in high school. And the first day that I met him, we lived in adjoining towns in New Jersey. And this is when I had my own business prior to coming to Atlantic. And the guy who came over to help me with my IT stuff and fix my computers, his son went to high school with Jeff. So I met Jeff through the guy who was my IT guy. And the minute that I met Jeff, I'm like, oh, you're an A&R guy. And he said, huh, what's that? He was 16. I said, tomorrow after school, you're going to come over here and I'm going to start teaching you everything I know about A&R and how to make records. He's like, okay. So he came over the next day, and whenever I was on the phone with Clive or a client or, whoever, I would put it on speaker. Jeff would listen. And by the time that I got the offer to go in and head up A&R at Atlantic, I said to Craig, I'm coming, but I have a kid with me. And he's like, who's the kid? I said, his name's Jeff. And, I'm training him. I think one day, he'll be part of the future of this company. And Craig met him and liked him. And so Jeff came on. Originally, he was in college, so he would come up on the weekends and he would, work on the weekends. And when he graduated, we hired him full time. And that was, how long is he out of college now? I think he's like 35, 36, so probably 15 years ago.
Yeah, very, very much so. And I think that that's such a great thing because we don't often hear about that. Often you hear, and I hear this from executives all the time, that there isn't a mentoring system.
Right.
And it's just so refreshing and inspiring to hear you speak about the importance of that particular aspect of A&R because it is important and we are in a different era. Pete, I want to shift the conversation to another area of your career, A&R wise, but which doesn't really get talked about a lot, but I think it's unique to you among the A&R aspect of your career and has been very, very successful, which is your incredible success with Broadway cast show albums. And, for our audience, these include Hamilton, Mean Girls, Dear Evan Hansen, which you won the Grammy for. Now, my understanding is that you first saw Hamilton at an advanced reading at the Public Theater before it opened off Broadway and wanted it for Atlantic, but you couldn't close the deal. It's a great story. Can you tell us that story, number one, and why you felt that show was worth pursuing?
Oh, 100%. When I was a kid, Broadway music was pop music. I remember being out on family drives in the old Cadillac in the 70s and listening to 8 tracks of a chorus line and singing every song like it was a pop hit. So Broadway's pop music was never far from my mind because even if there's not a Broadway cast album that is a cultural success, it just means it's dormant. It doesn't mean it's gone away. It'll come back with the right collection of music. So when I was starting at Atlantic, or a couple of months before I started at Atlantic, my daughter, who is now a theatrical talent agent, but back then was just a very eager preteen who loved theater, would want me to bring her to all these Broadway musicals. And I didn't really have much interest at the time, but she would say, we gotta go. And one day she drags me to see the show called In the Heights. And this was 2008, and I'm watching this show and I'm reading the playbill. And In the Heights was the first show written for Broadway by Lin-Manuel Miranda. And I didn't know who that was at the time back in 2008, but in reading the playbill, I found out that Lin-Manuel Miranda and I have something in common. We went to the same college. And the college that we went to, Wesleyan University in Connecticut, is a small college, small liberal arts college, where, we all kind of look at each other as like outsiders, and we're all kind of rooting for each other's success, whether we know each other or not. But we're always bonded by the fact that we share this college as, the place we went to school and got our education. So after seeing In the Heights and falling in love with it and falling in love with Lynn, I called up Wesleyan and I said, can you connect me with this guy? He's a genius. And they're like, sure, here's his number. So I call him and I'm like, you don't know me, but we went to the same school. I'm, a little older than you are, but we both went to Wesleyan. I just saw it In the Heights. I think it's a genius show. And whatever project you're doing next, I'd like to do at Atlantic. I'm about to join Atlantic as head of A&R. He's like, great, let's stay in touch. So fast forward a few years later, and Lynn, as a writer, was signed and is still signed to Warner Chappell, the publishing division of Warner Music Group. And the publisher who was overseeing Lynn's work at the time was a guy named Sean Flavin, who's now at Concord Theatricals. But at the time, he was in charge of the theatrical writers at Warner Chappell. And he knew my In the Heights story. So he comes to me one day. He's like, hey, Pete, remember your conversation with Lynn? His new show is ready to be seen. It's not for public performance yet, but if you want to come to a reading, there's going to be a reading of this show downtown opposite the Public Theater in a little workshop room. Some other theatrical people are going to be there giving him notes. If you want to sit in, and you and I can go down and see it. And that was Hamilton. And I remember as clear as day sitting next to Stephen Schwartz, who wrote, Wicked and Godspell and Pippin, and watching him write notes for Lynn, on this early iteration of Hamilton, and being really, really fascinated by what I had seen because it was completely different from anything I had ever seen staged before. So I went back to my bosses at Atlantic, and Atlantic had not done a cast album in probably a decade at that point. And I said, I want to do this cast album. And they crunched the numbers and they said, this doesn't make sense financially because no cast album has sold over 50,000 units or 100,000 units in the last 5 years or whatever it was. And I said, yeah, but it doesn't matter. This is one like Santana Supernatural. I'm saying to myself, you got to go all in. And it's either going to work or it's not, but you got to give it a shot. And so Craig, who is the creative's creative, Craig Kallman, the best boss you can have as an A&R person because he's a music fan. The joke is, you cut Craig open, he bleeds vinyl, right? So, that's the guy. He's, got over 2 million pieces of vinyl in his own personal collection. That's the type of guy as an A&R person you want to work with, right? So I pitched Craig on this, and Craig's all in. He's like, I love this idea. Let's take a meeting with Lynn. So we take the meeting with Lynn, and we realize that even though we're the first record label to reach out, and we're the first record label to have the meeting with Lynn, at some point the word starts to get out that this show, could be something. So other labels start circling. It always makes a big deal with any project or any artist when you're first, because what it means when you're first is that, it's not like you heard it from another A&R person or there's hype or there's research. It's just you're believing before anybody else. So that always counts for something, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get the project. So what I start hearing is that Lynn is taking other meetings, and he's taking meetings with Sony, with a guy named Salam Remy, who is a legendary hip-hop producer. He's taking meetings with Warner Brothers Records, our sister label at Warner Music Group, Atlantic sister label. He's taking meetings with Mike Elizondo, who's doing A&R at Warner Brothers at the time, but is also a legendary hip-hop producer. And Craig and I are big music fans, but we're not legendary hip-hop producers. And what Lynn keeps saying to us is, I want this to be as credible a show with hip-hop heads as I want it to be with theater people. And the fact that these two other labels came in after the fact with A&R people on their staffs who were also record producers, who also had hip-hop credentials, like legitimate hip-hop credentials. I said to Craig one day, Craig, we're fucked. We're not getting this. Unless we can figure out our move on the chessboard for to checkmate this, I don't see how we do it. And he said, well, we can't lose this. Figure it out, So then I realized, oh, shit, the answer is sitting right in front of me. There's an A&R guy at Atlantic named Riggs Morales. And Riggs has a lot, even though they don't know each other yet, Riggs and Lynn have a lot in common. They have a very similar background. They're both hip-hop heads. They're both intellectuals. Riggs came up as a journalist. He wrote the unsigned hype column in The Source that one day he goes through a box of cassettes, listens to something, and like John Landau did with I Have Seen the Future of Rock and Roll, and his name is Bruce Springsteen, Riggs does the hip-hop equivalent, I Have Heard the Future of Hip-Hop, and his name is Eminem, right? So he writes that column in unsigned hype for The Source, and it ends up getting him an A&R job at Shady Records, where he signs 50 Cent and, really becomes this, hip-hop bona fide in that world. And Atlantic hires Riggs, and he's still pretty new on the job. So he's not doing a ton at the time. He's still new. I'm like, okay, this is my Hail Mary. I call Riggs, and I'm like, hey, I need your help. He's like, yeah, what you got? What you got? And I'm like, this is going to sound weird. There is this guy. His name is Lin-Manuel Miranda. He's written a hip hop musical about the founding fathers. It's called Hamilton. And right now he's meeting with Salam. He's meeting with Elizondo. Craig and I are taking good meetings with him, but we need a hip hop cosign. What do you think? He's like, oh, it sounds great. He's like, have you called the Roots? And I'm like, oh my God, that's a great idea, Riggs. I said, no, I haven't called the Roots, but if you call the Roots and you can get the Roots to see, a preview of this show and sign on as executive producers of this album, checkmate, we got it. And Riggs is like, I got you. Give me a minute. And he calls me back, like maybe a couple of days later. He's like, yeah, they're in. So we introduce Riggs to Lynn. We introduced the Roots to Lynn, and we got the deal. And the good news about that is that to this day, Riggs and Lynn are like brothers. They talk to each other multiple times a day. Riggs is as much a part of Lynn's life now as anybody. And so for me as a head of A&R, I'm like, that's part of my job too. That part of the job is knowing when you're not going to be able to close yourself. How do you close? What tools do you have in your toolbox that maybe you're not using? And, without Riggs, we don't get the Roots, and without the Roots, we don't get Hamilton.
Unbelievable. So much of what you're saying, is about dreaming and believing. And Pete, you once said, part of being an A&R person is being a dreamer, and you have to be able to shut your eyes and imagine the act that is showcasing for you in front of, like playing at Madison Square Garden. And the only people that are dreamers are the A&R people. Do you feel that we still have that quality in A&R today?
Not as much as we should, because there's a whole world now of A&R done by A&R research people and analytics and coders and computer programmers. And, sure, you want to know what the audience is gravitating towards, but no algorithm was going to identify and rewrite smooth. No algorithm was going to introduce the Roots to Lin-Manuel Miranda. There's still got to be a human element to it. Figure out, okay, if we do this and this and this, if we change this lyric and we make this chorus a pre-chorus, things like that, there've got to be dreamers. Right. That's why I love, the A&R guys of the past, who had this vision. Jerry Wexler at Atlantic Records, who signs Aretha Franklin after she had failed as an artist at Columbia Records. He's like, she's an amazing artist, but they're not making the right records on her. Yeah, they got the A right, but they got the R wrong. So you know what we're going to do? Jerry Wexler says when we get Aretha Franklin to Atlantic Records, we're going to put her in church. And that's exactly what he did, And so it's basically these gospel sessions with pop lyrics. And that's where Aretha Franklin shone. That's where she was able to shine. And that's what makes Jerry Wexler one of the greatest A&R people of all time. So I'm always looking around to see who's it going to be, who's going to have that vision to be able to connect dots that don't exist right now, to be able to create something that the audience is not going to realize that they've always wanted. And that's the genius and the magic of A&R.
Yeah, it definitely is. And you sometimes see that at labels on a different level, and maybe I'm wrong on this, but when you had your role as president of A&R at Atlantic, there was a time when you also took on the task of relaunching the iconic ATCO label. And I'm just curious, what was the motivation behind resurrecting this storied label at that particular time? Was it a belief that artists had been left behind, or was it that more talent needed to come into the Atlantic fold? What was that at the time?
I think it was the opportunity for my bosses, Craig and Julie Greenwald, to give me the opportunity to be the president of a label inside of Atlantic, because in the 20-year run that Julie and Craig had as a co-chairman, they never had president of the label. So this was the opportunity for them to say, hey, we see you, we see the job you're doing. Why don't we kind of dust off this imprint and give you the opportunity to work, with new artists on ATCO?
Okay, totally makes sense.
Pete, your vast knowledge of music history must inevitably impact your A&R choices. And I'm curious, how does this perspective influence the way that you evaluate emerging artists today?
I think it's always, the more I can study the past and the more I could learn about the history of recorded music, it's almost like you have a file cabinet in your brain where anything you're listening to, you can cross-reference against any song that's come before, any artist that's come before. Not necessarily, oh, this uses the same chords or this lyric is similar to that song, but it's more like, oh, this artist is doing something in a way that hasn't been done since X. And when X did it, like the B.B. King analogy, right? It's like you're always looking to see, okay, this artist came up with the idea and did it, but they were only able to get to the 50-yard line. What if I take the idea and just make it better? What if there's a guitar player that you hear tomorrow that, plays licks like Prince or like Jimi Hendrix, but is missing something? What is the added special sauce that we could suggest that they add to help their audience grow? It's always like that. And the more that I can study the past, music is infinite, so there are always going to be things to learn. And, the history of contemporary music is fascinating, and you can just go down these rabbit holes and learn. And, I'm actually teaching a class at the Berklee College of Music this semester on the history of A&R. And we're studying people that I didn't even know a ton about. Like last week we were studying this woman named Lillian McMurray, who had a label in the 1950s called Trumpet Records in Mississippi. And she was a white woman during segregation. She signed Sonny Boy Williamson and Elmore James. And, this was this white woman in the middle of a segregated community in Jackson, Mississippi, without any music experience or any business experience. And she just loved the music. And, it's fascinating because people like her, people like Helen Oakley Dance or Miriam Abramson or any of these women from a generation or two ago, their stories are being lost. Nobody is talking about the pioneering work that they did. So, like I said, it just goes in the file cabinet. And maybe, when I'm teaching one of these classes, there's a young woman who's studying music business in the class who raises her hand, who has the potential to be the next Lillian McMurray or the next Helen Oakley Dance.
Yeah, and I'm trying to remember her last name, Florence
Greenberg. Yeah, of course.
Greenberg, yeah, the famous Florence, who had Dionne Warwick and several others in her label. I think it was in the 50s or early 60s.
Yeah, it was called Scepter Records.
Scepter, that's
and
it.
And the fascinating thing about Florence Greenberg is, do you know how old she was when she decided that she was going to try to work in music?
No.
She was 43 years old.
Wow. I did not know that.
She was a suburban housewife in New Jersey. Her daughters came home from school one day and said, Mom, the girls who did the talent show and won, they're amazing. She's like, bring them over the house. The girls come over the house. She's like, you guys are amazing. I'm going to record you. And that was the Shirelles. You can't make this up, right? The history is so fascinating that as an A&R person, you want to recreate that history. You want to, put your part and your imprint on the music of tomorrow the way that these pioneers did it before. And the more that we can learn from their stories, the more that we're armed with how they did it so that hopefully we can do it, for a new generation.
Absolutely. As you were speaking, Pete, your history with Atlantic, I mean, anybody who knows anything about the music business knows that is truly one of the most storied and historic labels. I mean, you mentioned, Aretha Franklin, who Atlantic broke, and I'm sure you've seen, the house that Ahmet built, the great, and if anybody who has not seen that documentary, that's a must.
Yeah.
That's an absolute must-see. Just a short deviation on that story, Pete. I remember having a conversation about 2 years before he died with Seymour Stein. He was out here at Muse Expo, and we were talking over lunch. He had not seen it. He had not seen the documentary. And I went out that night and bought the DVD and mailed it to his house just so he would see it. Oh, yeah, because he literally hadn't seen it. And he knew Ahmed very, very, very well for many years and didn't see it. And that's a man who, I mean, you probably had many conversations with him, really knew music history. And so for him,
I mean, the fascinating thing about Seymour, and I got to know Seymour really well when we worked together when I was at Atlantic and he was still inside the Warner Music Group building.
Right.
You know, even though he's well known, like at Sire, you know, for artists like the Ramones and the Talking Heads and, you know, being the American label for the Smiths and Depeche Mode, and obviously Madonna. The thing about Seymour is, do you know what his favorite song was of all time?
I think it was, yes, I've heard him mention it before. It was some song from like, what, the 40s or 50s?
Well, it's the French national anthem in French.
Oh, my God.
He goes so much deeper.
Yeah.
And then, you know, I used this phrase earlier about Craig Kallman when I said you cut him open and he bleeds vinyl.
Right.
That's a quote that I stole from a story about Seymour Stein, because Seymour Stein, when he was a kid, he worked in the chart department at Billboard magazine. And he was able, as a teenager, to sit in the record review meetings at Billboard. And in the record review meetings, this was an era where a record review, a single review in Billboard magazine could break a song. And because everybody read it, and that's what the DJs would play, and that's what the record stores would buy if the Billboard picked it. So the record labels used to show up at these meetings to pitch their new singles to the singles meeting at Billboard. And one day, a man named Sid Nathan comes into the singles meet at Billboard magazine, and Sid is in from Cincinnati. He has a label called King Records, most notably for signing and breaking James Brown. But Sid is right out of Central Casting, short, fat, cigar, obnoxious, you know, with a gravelly voice. And he meets Seymour, and he says to Seymour, "You've got to come and spend your summers in Cincinnati learning the business." And Seymour says, "I'm 16 years old. You're going to have to convince my parents." So he comes over to, I think either the parents went to meet Sid, I don't think they went to Seymour's apartment, but the parents went to meet Sid, and Sid says to the parents, he has to go to Cincinnati next summer. And the parents are like, "Why?" "You don't understand. Your kid has shellac in his veins."
Exactly. Sid saw it. He saw it in Seymour. Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's the same thing that I saw in Jeff Levin, and, you know, hopefully that Charles Koppelman and Clive Davis saw in me. You know, it's like we have to, you know, pay it forward, and we have to find the next, you know, we have to find the next Sid Nathans who can find the next Seymour Steins to keep this moving, you know, keep it going.
Absolutely. I want to talk to you about another aspect of the A&R process that often doesn't get talked about, and that is, you know, you have worked in your career with thousands of artists and bands, and having worked with so many of them in so many aspects of this industry and in your own career, can you talk about what you have observed? And you don't have to name names, but just what specific factors do you feel holds artists back from achieving success in their careers?
I think a lot of artists are scared. I think that the reason that Carlos Santana hated Smooth so much is because I think viscerally he knew that if he recorded this song and released this song, it would change his life. And did he want to be in the spotlight again? Did he want to be that famous again? You know, it's scary because a successful artist's life is not a normal life. And so a lot of times, you know, the artists are, you know, they're excited to be signed. They're excited to be making a career making music, but they're scared. And, you know, you look at the roster on Atlantic, one of the hardest working artists on the Atlantic roster is Ed Sheeran. He doesn't need to work hard, yet he works harder than most every new artist there because he doesn't know when this ride is going to stop. And so if he sees his schedule, and there's like an hour hole in it. You know, why is this empty? Oh, we wanted to give you a lunch break. Nope, fill it. because he wants to work as hard as he can to make sure that he's not leaving anything on the table. And I think that a lot of times the artists just don't want it hard enough or don't want to work hard enough. I've had artists who have booked national tours who call me and say, I need to cancel my tour. I'm like, why do you need to cancel your tour? I have a sore throat. I'm like, you don't think it's gonna get better? There's fear that goes with it. And, fear is what often leads to, abusing substances and, like the dark roads that we've all seen and read about with artists who, go off the deep end. But they just have to have the right head on their shoulders, and they have to have a work ethic that is going to, even once they're successful, to have the work ethic that's going to make them work harder than anybody else in the room.
Yeah, it's so interesting because have you seen The Defiant Ones? The documentary, The Defiant Ones?
No.
That's one I would recommend you watch. It's a 4-part documentary, but it's about the life of Jimmy Iovine and Dr. Dre and how those two lives intersect. But you learn a lot about Jimmy Iovine, and he said, one of the things that I learned about the nature of my character as a man is that, fear is a very, very strong headwind, and it can slow you down. And he said, one of the things that I feel was a major element in my life of overcoming that was making fear emotionally and psychologically for me a tailwind. And he said, that was so important in terms of his early career because he always felt he had to work twice as hard as the next guy just to, get by. And he's felt that way early in his career, and it was kind of like, well, if John Lennon and Bruce Springsteen think I can do this, well, I guess I can. But, that kind of doubt that you speak about and that kind of fear, it does hold people back. And I'm so glad you talked about the work ethic because we talk about that a lot on this show. Everybody I ask is that, especially people who deal with creative talent, I ask A&R people and managers especially, what are the non-creative qualities that you look for once you're interested in an artist? And, they all talk about that work ethic, that drive. Andy Gould famously said, if one of the worst things that can happen is when you believe in an artist and you actually end up even working with them and you realize, if you're really honest, in the darkest moments of the night, that you want this more than the artist. He said it's heartbreaking. And he said, and I've been through that a couple times where I've worked with somebody, 2 or 3 years, and you realize you want it more than they do. And he said, that's just, it's heartbreaking because you can't be the artist, you can't write the songs, you can't perform the shows. It's devastating, and I don't think a lot of people get that just because we assume because everybody is like incredibly talented, of course they're driven in heart. No, they're not. They're not all Ed Sheerans.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I would say the same thing to anyone who's listening who wants to have a career in A&R is you've got to work harder than anyone else. Because if you're not, someone else is. And you've got to show up. Because if you get a call to be somewhere and it's 1 in the morning and you're tired, and you decide not to show up, someone's going to take that call and they are going to show up. And maybe that's the call that Jimmy Iovine got on Christmas Eve to come and get coffee for John Lennon.
Yeah.
And if he doesn't show up, then somebody else is getting that gig. And if somebody else is getting that gig, maybe 2 years later, Jimmy Iovine's not engineering Bruce Springsteen. And maybe 10 years later, Jimmy Iovine's not producing U2. You have to show up and you have to work hard because if you don't, someone is going to show up and they're going to work harder.
Pete, we touched on this earlier when you were referring to the analogies of the baseball players and the at-bats and all that stuff. And I'm curious, your career has been marked by great successes, but undoubtedly, I also imagine there have been missteps along the way. And I'm curious, what have both your achievements and challenges revealed to you about yourself?
Again, I look at Ted Williams, the greatest baseball hitter of all time, had a lifetime batting average over 400. That means that Ted Williams got out, made an out 6 out of 10 times. So I'm not Ted Williams, but if I can be batting 300, let me be in the conversation for Cooperstown, and that's what I try to do. It's like, you're not going to get it right all the time because the audience is fickle and you don't know You don't always know what they're going to like and what they're not going to like. So the failures that I've had, I'm like, well, I guess this is a record that I'm just going to be listening to myself for fun, as opposed to walking down the street and, someone is blasting one of the songs that I've been involved with from their car and just having the, bopping up and down with a big smile on their face and having the best time. And I can pat myself on the back, because without me, maybe we're not having this moment where this person is bopping in the car,
Yeah, it's interesting, Pete, because, you have, throughout this conversation, I think it's evident to anyone listening that you have a very, very strong and profound sense of curiosity about music, about, history and so forth, and your belief in the importance of, others like A&R executives that you work with also being well-versed in music history. It inspired the creation of a project called Rock and Roll High School in 2014. And for our audience, what sparked the idea for this project, and what did you hope to achieve with it?
Well, I realized, going back to our young friend Jeff Levin, who is the young A&R guy who I met when he was 16, when he started working for me at Atlantic after he graduated from college, he showed up at work one day wearing a T-shirt that had the iconic Andy Warhol Banana album cover of the Velvet Underground.
Yeah.
But he was wearing it, and I've known him since he's 16 years old, so I knew the answer I was going to get when I asked him the question. I'm like, why are you wearing this T-shirt? And he's like, what do you mean? It's cool. I'm like, yeah, but you have no idea who the band is. He's like, yes, I do. I'm like, who's the band? He's like, I don't know. Well, who's the lead singer? I don't know. Name one song. I don't know. And after, after like 10 I don't knows, he turns the conversation around and he challenges me. He's like, you don't understand. Nobody my age knows this stuff. And I said, well, you're doing A&R. You should know. Because if you're signing a band whose dad brought them up on the Velvet Underground, right, or the Stooges or the MC5, you should know this music. And he's like, nobody my age knows this, and I'm going to prove it to you. And within 5 minutes, he's got 10 kids, like all 25 or younger, sitting in my office. And I start asking them the basics, like who were the brothers in the Kinks? Nobody knows. Right. Who was the lead singer of blah, blah, blah? Nobody knows. Finally, I'm like, who was the original lead singer of Van Halen? Girl raises her hand. I'm like, oh, finally. She's like, Eddie Van Halen. I'm like, oh my God. So I said, okay, Jeff, you're right. Nobody your age knows anything. You've proven, this is really depressing, but you've proven your point. So this is what we're going to do. Starting next week, I'm going to hold class, and I'm going to teach all the young A&R people, all the young creatives, anyone who wants to come, about the history of contemporary music. We're going to start in 1955, dawn of the rock era, and we're going to go chronologically to the present day. So I said to the room, I said, it's optional for all of you. And then I point to Jeff, it's mandatory for you. And so Jeff and 5 other people show up to the first one. We start talking about, Chuck Berry and Bill Haley and Buddy Holly and like all the Little Richard, like all the great, early pioneers of rock and roll. And they're getting really into it because we're showing videos and we're listening to songs and it's exciting. And the next week, we go up a decade, and instead of 6 people there are 20 people there. By the time we finished, there were like over 100 people coming because they wanted to learn about the history of music. Then when the pandemic happened, I had started to bring in guests because I didn't want to keep repeating, okay, let's do the 1950s again after we got to present day. So I started bringing in guests and I would interview them. So I interviewed Clive Davis and I interviewed Graham Nash and I interviewed all these people who were, either part of my life or part of Atlantic's life, and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people would show up to see these interviews. And then when the pandemic happened, I got a call from the global head of HR at Warner Music Group who said, those interviews you do, can you do that on Zoom for the entire Warner Music Group globally while everyone is working remote? And I said, sure, no problem. So I started doing these interviews on Zoom, And I realized if I'm doing them on Zoom, I'll just press record and I will repurpose it as a podcast. And we called the podcast Rock and Roll High School. We've now done 3 seasons, close to 50 episodes. And it's fascinating for me to be able to talk to people like the Temptations, like Eddie Levert from the OJs, like Gamble and Huff, Jimmy Webb, Nile Rodgers, the great songwriters, Paul Williams, Jeff Barry, Barry Mann, and then just great, whether they're artists like Peter Frampton or Todd Rundgren or Gloria Gaynor talking about how she was in a full body brace recording I Will Survive, where it was kind of like life imitating art, and like these fascinating stories. And so that's available now, 3 seasons, anywhere you listen to podcasts, called Rock and Roll High School. We're recording season 4 now. And the goal is to educate, so if there's some young kid out there who's wearing the Velvet Underground shirt, but doesn't know why they're wearing it, well, listen to our podcast and maybe you can learn something.
Yeah, it gives them context. Yeah, it's really great. And we'll definitely share that on the show notes of the show. I wanted to ask you, Pete, you just stepped back from your role as president of A&R at Atlantic to launch Pure Tone Records. What inspired you to take this new direction at this point in your career?
I think that any time that you're running A&R for a major label, it's not a job for life. It's basically you're going to have your run, and then you're going to move on. I think it's best for you and it's best for the label to get some new, creative ideas in there. I was there for 16 years. I gave it all I got, and now I'm ready to own my own stuff, because as much success as you can have as an A&R person for a major label, you're not owning the content. You're doing a service, you're working, you're an employee. You might get a royalty here and there, which is nice. But if you could actually own invest your own money and have ownership with the artist in what they're creating, then that's definitely the next step for someone who's been doing it for multiple decades. Because I already do it on the publishing side, and the publishing side is such a brilliant career, because if you pick right on the publishing side and you find a writer, who's just starting out, and you invest in that writer when they need the investment because they're not making any money from their songwriting, and you invest in them and you introduce them to people and you give them critique on their songwriting, it's kind of teaching a kid how to ride a bicycle. In the beginning, you have training wheels. You take the training wheels off, and then some of these writers have gone on to be, some of the biggest pop writers of the last decade. And there's ownership there because you own the copyrights. So if the copyright becomes I Will Always Love You, or one of these songs that you referred to, Ritch, earlier as a standard, you actually have stake in it. You have ownership in it. So kind of where my next career path is heading, and so far so good.
That's good. We're so glad to hear it. We've talked about this in regards to you, and you've mentioned several of them, and I would imagine a man like you has several. But throughout your life, what books or films or documentaries have been particularly inspiring to you, professionally speaking, that you would recommend to our audience that they should be watching?
I took a book with me on my honeymoon. I've been married close to 30 years. I took a book with me on my honeymoon. I don't know why I picked it up, but it was a memoir of a famous record executive who we've actually mentioned earlier in this conversation. And I had no connection to him, to the label, to anything at the time. I just picked up the book and I read it, and it was so touching to me. It was a book called The Rhythm and the Blues, and it was a memoir of Jerry Wexler written with David Ritch. And I read it on my honeymoon, and it just stuck with me that, this was a guy who was so intelligent and so erudite. If you read memos that he wrote, as the head of Atlantic with Ahmet, in the time that they ran the label together, it's like a master class in grammar and elocution. It's like I would have to go to a dictionary and look up some of these words. It's classic. I would highly, highly recommend that book because there's a humanity to it where he gets into the depths of his personal story. And, it's beautiful. It'll have you, crying and just kind of being fully enmeshed in the Healing Power of Music. That's one book. Sticking with the Atlantic, the Atlantic team from the heyday of Atlantic, there's an incredible documentary film about Tom Dowd. Tom Dowd, along with Ahmet Ertegun and Jerry Wexler, was the sonic architect of Atlantic in its heyday. Kind of crafted art of multi-track recording and was a scientist by trade, actually worked on the Manhattan Project during World War II and went to college after World War II to study physics. But since the Manhattan Project was classified, he knew more about physics than the professor did. And the professor thought he was making everything up and failed him. So he decided to go into music and started engineering music sessions and became a legendary engineer at Atlantic, engineered, all those Ray Charles and Aretha Franklin sessions, and ultimately went on to be one of the most legendary record producers of all time. Produced Layla for Derek and the Dominoes, produced all the Eric Clapton records, produced all the Allman Brothers records, produced all the Rod Stewart records. Genius, but like the nicest man you'll ever meet. And there's a documentary called Tom Dowd and the Language of Music about his life and career that's also fascinating.
It's a great documentary.
Yeah, that is a great documentary. He also features in the Atlantic Records documentary, The House That Ahmet Built.
Yeah,
he's in that as well.
Pete, I wanted to ask you, for those who aspire to build a career in A&R today, what key advice would you offer to help them navigate the evolving music industry today?
I think it's all about finding talent for an audience who doesn't know that's what's missing in their lives, right? So how do you figure out what an audience wants to hear before they want to hear it? And like we said before, the TikToks of the world, those were all shortcuts. And, I'm not sure if Bob Dylan or Radiohead, are going to come from TikTok, the next ones, so you have to figure out how you find these people. I just reread the biography of John Hammond, and which I taught to my class at Berkeley. And that's also a great book. It's called The Producer, Biography of John Hammond by a writer named Dunstan Pryall, really well-written book. And John Hammond, arguably the greatest A&R guy of all time, discovered Billie Holiday, Count Basie, Benny Goodman, Bob Dylan, Bruce Springsteen, it goes on, Aretha Franklin the first time at Columbia, goes on and on and on. But how did he realize that an artist like Bob Dylan or an artist like Bruce Springsteen is what the audience wanted? And I think that he was able to hear something special before anyone other than the artists themselves knew that it was special. And how can we, as the next generation of A&R people, train our ears to understand that? And, there's a kid out there, who's 16 or 17, who's as obsessed with music as I was at that age, or as Seymour Stein was at that age. And they're just going to have to figure out how you do it in 2025. How do you do it in 2026? How do you use the tools of technology that are at your fingertips now, but that you don't take the cheap way out by seeing, what everybody is gravitating towards on TikTok? How do you find the next arena headliner, the next stadium headliner? Like, shut your eyes, listen to something and say, you know what? One day in the not too distant future, I could visualize 20,000 people paying a hard ticket to see this person headline Madison Square Garden.
Yeah, that is so true. Pete, I want to turn the question around one little aspect, which is, as the industry evolves, what insights would you offer artists and bands to assist them in navigating their careers effectively if they're committed to building a career in music today?
I think the most important thing is finding your audience. Getting signed to a record label doesn't matter. Having fans in the music business who do A&R doesn't matter. What only matters is connecting your art with your audience. And if you can't figure that out, if you're just making music, but you're not sure how to connect the dots between the audience who, should be gravitating towards the music, well, maybe then you need an A&R guy to help you or an A&R gal to help you, because we're good at connecting the dots in a way sometimes the artists can't see, or they're just too kind of in it to see, and they got to step back to see it. But the artist should be making music for their audience, for their fandom. One of the buzzwords of the last couple of years in the music business is, fan, super fan engagement. The artist can build their own community fan by fan by fan. And there are ways that artists now can communicate directly with the fan that they weren't able to do a generation ago or two generations ago. You know, if I loved an artist when I was growing up as a teenager, you know, there's a P.O. box address written on the back of an album that I could send a self-addressed stamped envelope to, and maybe I'll get a signed photo. You know, now the artist can call you.
Right. Exactly.
Hey, thanks for coming to my show last night, Pete. Glad you were there.
Absolutely.
Pete, what's the best way that people can reach you? They want to get in touch with you?
I'm on social media. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Facebook. You know, Rock and Roll High School has a website. You know, you want to find me, you can find me. That's easy.
Great.
And I'm still working at Atlantic. Even though I'm not running the A&R department, I'm still A&Ring my projects there. And I still have two artists that are signed to my Pure Tone label that run through Atlantic. So you could find me at my Atlantic Records email as well, which is just pete.ganbarg@atlanticrecords.com. And I'm always happy to chat with people who reach out.
Pete, you know, from the bottom of both of our hearts, we cannot thank you enough, truly, for taking the time. And this has been an absolutely fascinating and insightful, and I believe very, very important conversation. So we both want to thank you immensely for taking the time to talk with us. I mean, I knew it was going to be this, which is why we did not schedule anything after this, and why we did such an extensive interview with you, because I knew that we would get
you were a number one. You were you had another hit single with us. So we're hoping to make this podcast the number one podcast.
Absolutely. So we thank you so much.
Well, it's always a pleasure talking to you guys. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Oh, Eric.
Yeah.
What a great conversation. You know, I love conversations like this. I mean, especially with somebody who is as passionate, as intelligent, as articulate, and as knowledgeable as Pete Ganbarg is.
Yeah.
It's such a joy to speak with somebody who's had the rich kind of history and understanding of music and what makes, you know, situations and artists work.
Yeah.
And also his own journey. You know, his own journey and what he contributed to others, you know, and I loved when he spoke about, you know, the whole thing of developing an ear for talent. This is something that, you know, from the very beginning of the conversation, when he talked about how, you know, he always had that penchant for records, always, you know, which I think it's an interesting one. Everyone comes into it from a different place, but he always had that element, the significance of identifying special talent and nurturing it. You know, particularly for the new generation of A&R professionals. It's two different points, but it's an interesting one. You know, the idea, it's one of the things I learned about A&R, and I know Pete knows this from working with Clive, that I learned, was a very, very important distinction when it comes to this whole thing of A&R and talent. There's a distinction between being able to go into a club and seeing a Metallica or seeing a Whitney Houston, okay, and saying, that's a great artist.
Right.
There's an enormous difference between that and then the next sentence, which is, and I know exactly the kind of record we need to make. Okay? That's where the disconnect often comes in the A&R. Remember, and Pete even said this in the thing, there's two aspects. There's artist and then there's the repertoire.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
Sometimes repertoire has to be put together. Sometimes it's self-contained where an artist writes that. And then your role as an A&R person becomes editor or, you know, going through that, where it's not like you're trying to find material for them, but selecting the material that will work. And I thought that was a very interesting aspect. And he obviously, you know, has a great track record in that.
Yeah. I also thought that, you know, missteps and success in A&R, working in A&R is like baseball. He says, you know, not all projects succeed, but learning from them and celebrating the occasional successes can lead to significant achievements. You know, he talks about that baseball average. And I think there was somebody else that we interviewed. I don't know if it was Jody Ambrosia or somebody who made that reference of baseball. And it's just very interesting to see, you know, how many at-bats you have and how many, you know, are successes. And like you said earlier, you know, people are not remembering by their failures, but by their successes.
Yes.
And so I thought that was an interesting thing. And, you know, and I also think too, you know, one thing that I want to personally say is because, you know, I always hear comments on our YouTube, or not hear, or read them, or just people in general that just knock A&R people and in general as what they do. And I submit to you, Pete Ganbarg.
Yeah. Oh, no, absolutely. This is a man who really knows the art
Yes.
and the craft
Right.
of A&R. And I think this conversation illustrates that. It's like, there are, A&R is all about getting an artist to the maximum of their potential, to get that vision out there. It's also to get everybody excited about it,
Right.
and to translate that vision within the company. And so it's not just about identifying talent, and it's not just about, okay, here's the record, we're done.
Right.
It doesn't work like that. Let's get specific, because one of the things that he talked about on the role of A&R and artists today, which I think our audience really would want to know, is the whole thing of building a fan base. This is not the era where you can just put a record out, hope that it's a massive hit, and sell.
Right.
There was an era many years ago where that was the case. It
Right.
was the copy model where we sold things, CD, singles, hits, whatever. Today, it is about building a fan base. And if you look at any artists that are out there, that's a very big factor. And what specifically I'm referring to is the fact that, music is free today. Whether it's you as an up-and-coming artist or Beyonce, does not matter. The music is free. So what is it that's going to make people say, I really need to be a part of this? And the answer is who you are, what you're about, where you're coming from. What do you stand for?
Right.
What don't you stand for? Those are the things, whether they're articulated or not by the audience. And I think oftentimes in this culture, they're not. But they're very, very present, and they're very, very real. And when Pete spoke about building that fan base, it's very important. And you and I have spoken about that, Eric, where we get, it's important to know who your fan base is.
Right, number one.
Who are we talking about? Who is your audience?
Right.
That's a question that when a record company has a marketing meeting about an artist, new or even established, who are we marketing this music to? It's not just we're throwing it out there hoping somebody somewhere picks it up. No, who is it? Is it men? Is it women? Are they older? Are they younger? Are they college educated?
Right.
Are they single? Are they
The
married?
avatar. Who is your avatar?
Exactly. Are they drinkers? Are they non-drinkers? I mean, you can really get granular about this stuff.
Psychographics and infographics.
Psychographics and
exactly.
Great. And we should have a thing on that.
Absolutely.
We should be definitely discussing that, because
that's creating the persona of who your ideal avatar is.
Yes.
And it goes even deeper. What types
much
of
deeper.
music they're consuming, what products do they consume, what things are they watching. I mean, it goes very deep, and it's a very interesting thing. One of the other things that I thought, getting back to the whole art of A&R, and like I said before, I submit to you Pete Ganbarg, which really is the essence of the art of A&R, is the development of smooth. And we went into a whole thing about that, because it was such a fascinating story how that song came to be, and how that kicked off just basically the rebirth of Carlos Santana's career. And so despite initial skepticism, the development of smooth became a definitive process, leading to what can now be seen as the key single from that project. And again, we're talking about a song that came out, oh my God,
97?
Yeah, 1997 or whatever.
Yeah, 98.
97,
98, yeah.
And so, but it's really a really interesting case study on the art of A&R and how that song came to be, and just how all the different hoops he had to jump through, and how everything came together, but how much he believed that song was going to be what it became, and that's a true testament of A&R, and that's what Clive did so well. And I guess, you guys coming from the school of Clive, you can speak to that better.
Yeah, I mean, Pete really articulated it well. It was, Pete's tenacity, like you were talking about, his actual belief. And one of the things that was so interesting about the point you just brought up is that now we're getting into the marrow, if you will, of what A&R is about, and how Pete talked about the shaping, and,
and I think even the lyric, he talked about how the lyrics, how it ended up being that Rob Thomas didn't want to take away from and then he said, well, what's the lyric that you have? And that was the lyric that just changed everything with the song.
Absolutely. Yes, exactly. And how oftentimes, and when he initially played it for Carlos hated it.
Right.
Think about it.
These are the stories that you hear, that just,
Exactly. It's not just like it all just came together. And it's about sticking with it. And about and also the whole thing of how he never kept Clive in the loop initially,
right?
But how it eventually all worked out.
Right.
But you got to see the individual steps which is often not spoken about in A&R. It's just sort of like, well, that was a big success, and
Right.
it just all worked out and happened on its own. Here you got to see how that big success was created, literally,
Yeah.
you know, in terms of the rewrite and the new lyric and getting Rob Thomas involved and so on and so forth. This really was an exciting conversation about, you know, the art and the craft and the soul of A&R by someone who's not only, you know, been there and done that, but has had an enormous track record in so many areas, not only with artists and songs, but also with Broadway. You know, and I thought his whole thing with Hamilton and the stories that he told with that really painted a fantastic portrait of what the life of an A&R person actually is.
Hey, Insiders, thanks so much for tuning into this episode. We really appreciate it. To get show notes, links, and everything that was mentioned during this interview, head on over to our official website at MUBUTV.com/podcast/show notes. If you're enjoying the content and what we're doing here on the show, please subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts from. And don't forget to rate and review our show at iTunes. 5-star reviews are always welcome and help to ensure that our podcast stands out on the top-rated and new and noteworthy charts on iTunes and our space. You can also find us at social media at Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter X, all ending with the handle MUBUTV, which is spelled MUBUTV. Don't forget to catch our flagship show, the MUBUTV Music Business Insider video series, airing every week on YouTube at youtube.com/MUBUTV. This show was produced and created by Ritch, Esra, and Eric Knight. Theme music by Disciples of Babylon, and be sure to tune in next week for another episode of the MUBUTV Music Business Insider Podcast.